Hi everyone, welcome back to KG Graves. Good to see you all again. Back in July 2009, we visited Arlington Cemetery in Virginia, USA, to visit the grave of John F. Kennedy, JFK, the 35th US President. Now, at the time of his assassination, I thought he was just killed by Lee Harvey Oswald, but after watching a recent documentary, I discovered that he was also a second shooter, and he was situated behind a picket fence at the grassy knoll. More information coming up about this shortly, but if you like the video, as usual, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Thanks for watching.
John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear
that you will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of your ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God. Vice President Johnson, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chief Justice, President Eisenhower, Vice President Nixon, President Truman, Reverend clergy, fellow citizens. We observe today not a victory of party, but a celebration of freedom, symbolizing an end as well as a beginning, signifying renewal as well.
John Fitzgerald Kennedy was born on the 29th of May 1917 in Brookline, Massachusetts. He was the 35th US President from 1961 until his assassination in 1963. He was also known as JFK, and his nickname was Jack. He was baptized on the 19th of June 1917 at St. Aidan's Church. He was one of 9 children. His parents were both from Irish descendants. With an outbreak of polio in Massachusetts, the family decided to move from Boston by private railway car to the Riverdale neighborhood of New York City in September 1927. Several years later, his brother Robert told Look magazine that his father had left Boston because of job signs that read, "No Irish need apply." In 1931, John spent his first years at Churchyard School in his older brother's shadow and compensated with rebellious behaviour that attracted a clique. Their most notorious stunt was exploding a toilet seat with a powerful firecracker. In the next chapel assembly, the headmaster, George St. John, brandished the toilet seat and spoke of certain muckers who would spit in our sea, leading John to name his group the Muckers Club. Because of their stunts, the club members were nearly expelled. John graduated from Harvard University in 1940 with a Bachelor of Arts in Government before joining the US Navy Reserve on the 24th of September 1941. On the 24th of April 1943, John took command of the patrol torpedo boat PT-109. On the night of the 1st, 2nd of August, in support of the new Georgia campaign, PT-109 was on its 31st mission with 14 other boats ordered to block or repel 4 Japanese destroyers and floatplanes. On that dark night and moonless night, John spotted a Japanese destroyer heading north on its return from the base of Kolomangara around 2 a.m. and attempted to turn to attack when PT-109 was rammed suddenly at an angle and cut in half by the destroyer Inauguration, killing 2 crew members while the others tried to stay afloat amid the wreckage. Despite re-injuring his back in the collision, he towed a badly burned crewman through the water to Plum Pudding Island with a life jacket strap clenched between his teeth. From there, John and his subordinate ensign George Ross made various forays through the Coral Islands searching for help. When they encountered an English-speaking native with a canoe, he carved his location on a coconut shell and requested a boat to rescue them. 7 days after the collision, with the coconut message delivered, the PT-109 crew were rescued. Decades later, it was the basis of a successful film. For his courage and leadership, John was awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Medal, and the injuries he suffered during the incident also qualified him for a Purple Heart. On the 1st of March 1945, John retired from the Navy Reserve on physical disability and was honourably discharged with the full rank of lieutenant. When later asked how he became a war hero, he joked, "It was easy. They cut my PT boat in half." On the 12th of August 1944, John's older brother, Joe Jr., a Navy pilot, was killed in an air mission, aged 29, when his plane exploded over the English Channel during the first attack execution of Operation Aphrodite during World War II. His body was never recovered. To console himself, he set out to assemble a privately published book of remembrances of his brother, As We Remember Joe. John's elder brother, Joe Jr., had been the family's political standard-bearer and had been tapped by their father to seek the presidency. Joe's death during the war in 1944 changed that course, and the assignment fell to John as the second eldest of the Kennedy siblings. In the summer of 1945, Joe Kennedy Sr. made a special effort to renew the family's presence in Massachusetts with a ship launching ceremony for the USS Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. to remind voters that 2 of his sons were war heroes. As early as 1949, John began preparing to run for the Senate. His younger brother Robert emerged as an important member of the campaign as manager. His mother and sisters contributed as highly effective canvassers by hosting a series of teas at hotels and parlours across Massachusetts to reach out to women voters. He was subsequently elected to the US Senate and served as junior senator for Massachusetts from 1953 to 1960. While in the Senate, he underwent several spinal operations over the next 2 years. Often absent from the Senate, he was at times critically ill and received Catholic last rites. During his convalescence in 1956, he published his book, Profiles in Courage, which won a Pulitzer Prize. In 1958, John was re-elected for a second term in the Senate. It was during his re-election campaign that his press secretary at the time, Robert E. Thompson, put together a film entitled The U.S. Senator John F. Kennedy Story, which exhibited a day in the life of the senator and showcased his family life as well as the inner workings of the office. It was the most comprehensive film produced about a Kennedy up to that time. In the aftermath of his re-election, he began preparing to run for president by travelling throughout the US with the aim of building his candidacy for 1960. He made modest contributions as a legislator, drafting more than 300 bills to assist Massachusetts and the New England region, some of which became law. On the 2nd of January 1960, John announced his candidacy for presidential nomination. His presidential campaign was a family affair, funded by his father and with his younger brother Robert acting as his campaign manager. At the start of the general election campaign, the Republican nominee and incumbent Vice President Richard Nixon held a 6-point lead in the polls. Major issues included how to get the economy moving again, his Roman Catholicism, the Cuban Revolution, and whether the space and missile programs of the Soviet Union had surpassed those of the US. The Kennedy and Nixon campaigns agreed to a series of televised debates. An estimated 70 million Americans, about two-thirds of the electorate, watched the first debate on the 26th of September. His campaign gained momentum after the first televised presidential debates in American history, and he was elected president, narrowly defeating Republican opponent Richard Nixon, who was the incumbent vice president. On election day, John defeated Nixon in one of the closest presidential elections of the 20th century. In the national popular vote, by most accounts, he led Nixon by just 0.2%, 49.7% to 49.5%, while in the electorate college, he won 303 votes to Nixon's 219. 269 were needed to win. John F. Kennedy was sworn in as the 35th president at noon on the 20th of January 1961. John's foreign policy was dominated by American confrontations with the Soviet Union, manifested by proxy contests in the global state of tension known as the Cold War. He focused on rearmament. Between 1961 to 1964, the number of nuclear weapons increased by 50%, as did the number of B-52 bombers to deliver them. In the later months of 1961, in a sign of rising Cold War tensions, both the US and the Soviet Union ended a moratorium on nuclear weapons testing. A brief standoff between the US and Soviet tanks occurred at Checkpoint Charlie in October following a dispute over free movement of the Allied personnel. On the 4th of April 1961, he authorized an attempt to overthrow the Cuban government of Fidel Castro in the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. In November 1961, he authorized Operation Mongoose, also known as the Cuban Project, aimed at removing the communists from power in Cuba. In October 1962, US spy planes discovered Soviet missile bases had been deployed in Cuba. More than a third of US National Security Council members, NSC, favored an unannounced air assault on the missile sites, but for some of them, this conjured up an image of Pearl Harbor in reverse. There was also some concern from the international community, asked in confidence, that the assault plan was an overreaction because Eisenhower had placed PGM-19 Jupiter missiles in Italy and Turkey in 1958. John managed to preserve restraint when a Soviet missile unauthorizedly downed a US Lockheed U-2 reconnaissance aircraft over Cuba, killing the pilot Rudolph Anderson Jr. At the President's direction, Robert Kennedy privately informed Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrinin that the US would remove the Jupiter missiles from Turkey within a short period after the crisis was over. On the 28th of October, Khrushchev agreed to dismantle the missile sites subject to UN inspections. The US publicly promised never to invade Cuba and privately agreed to remove its Jupiter missiles from Italy and Turkey, which were by then obsolete and had been supplanted by submarines equipped with UGM-27 Polaris missile. This crisis brought the world closer to nuclear war than at any other time before or after. It is considered that the humanity of both Khrushchev and Kennedy prevailed. During his 4-day visit to his ancestral home of Ireland, beginning on the 26th of June 1963, John accepted a grant of armorial bearings from the Chief Herald of Ireland. He also received honorary degrees from the National University of Ireland and Trinity College of Dublin, attending a state dinner in Dublin, and was conferred with the freedom of the towns and cities of Wexford, Cork, Dublin, Galway and Limerick. He visited the cottage at Dunganstown near New Ross, County Wexford, where his ancestors had lived before emigrating to America. He later told aides that the trip was the best 4 days of his life. Troubled by long-term dangers of radioactive contamination and nuclear weapons proliferation, Kennedy and Khrushchev agreed to negotiate a nuclear test ban treaty. In their Vienna summit meeting in June 1961, they both reached an informal understanding against nuclear testing but the Soviet Union began testing nuclear weapons that September. In response, the United States conducted tests 5 days later. Ultimately, the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union were the initial signatories to a limited treaty, which prohibited atomic testing on the ground, in the atmosphere, or underwater, but not underground. The US Senate approved the treaty on the 23rd of September by an 80 to 19 margin. John signed the ratified treaty on the 7th of October 1963. France was quick to declare that it was free to continue developing and testing its nuclear defences. In the aftermath of the Soviet launch of Sputnik 1, the first artificial Earth satellite, NASA had proposed a crewed lunar landing by the early 1970s. Funding for the program, known as the Apollo program, was far from certain, as Eisenhower held an ambivalent attitude on crewed spaceflight. Early in his presidency, John was poised to dismantle the crewed space program, but he postponed any decision out of deference to Vice President Johnson. In April 1961, Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first person to fly in space, reinforcing America's fears about being left behind in the technological competition with the Soviet Union. Less than a month later, Alan Shepard became the first American to travel into space, strengthening John's confidence in NASA. The following year, John Glenn, aboard the Mercury craft Friendship 7, became the first American to orbit the Earth. He asked Johnson to explore the feasibility of beating the Soviets to the moon. Though he was concerned about the program's costs, he agreed to Johnson's recommendation that the US commit to a crewed lunar landing as the major objective of the US space program. After Congress authorized the funding, NASA increased its staffing level and built 2 new centers: a Launch Operations Center for the Large Moon Rocket northwest of Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, and a Manned Spacecraft Center on land donated through Rice University in Houston. On the 20th of July 1969, almost 6 years after his death, Apollo 11 landed the first crewed spacecraft on the moon. On Friday the 22nd of November 1963, John was assassinated at 12:30 p.m. in Dallas. Traveling in a presidential motorcade through downtown Dallas, he was shot once in the back, and the bullet exited via his throat, and once in the head. John was taken to Parkland Hospital for emergency medical treatment, where he was pronounced dead 30 minutes later at 1 p.m. He was 46 years old and had been in office for 1,036 days. Lee Harvey Oswald, a former US Marine and an order filler at the Texas School Book Depository from which the shots were fired, was arrested for the murder of police officer J.D. Tippit and was subsequently charged with John's assassination. He denied shooting anyone, claiming he was a patsy, and was shot dead by Jack Ruby on the 24th of November before he could be prosecuted. Ruby was arrested and convicted for the murder of Oswald. Ruby successfully appealed his conviction and death sentence, but became ill and died of cancer on the 3rd of January 1967, while the date for his new trial was being set. His vice president, Lyndon B. Johnson, assumed the presidency upon his death. The FBI and the Warren Commission both concluded Oswald had acted alone and was not part of a conspiracy. The results of this investigation are disputed by many. The assassination proved to be a pivotal moment in US history because of its impact on the nation and the ensuing political repercussions. A 2004 Fox News poll found that 66% of Americans thought there had been a conspiracy to kill President Kennedy, while 74% thought that there had been a cover-up. In 1979, the US House Select Committee on Assassinations concluded, with 1/3 of the committee dissenting, that it believed that Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. The committee was unable to identify the other gunmen or the extent of the conspiracy. John's body was brought back to Washington after his assassination. Early on the 23rd of November, 6 military pallbearers carried the flag-draped coffin into the East Room of the White House, where he lay in repose for 24 hours. Then the coffin was carried on a horse-drawn caisson to the Capitol to lie in state. Throughout the day and night, hundreds of thousands lined up to view the guarded casket, with 250,000 passing through the rotunda during the 18 hours of lying in state. His funeral service was held on the 25th of November at St. Matthew's Cathedral in Washington, D.C. The Requiem Mass was led by Cardinal Richard Cushing, then the Archbishop of Boston. It was attended by approximately 1,200 guests, including representatives from over 90 countries. In his personal life, John met Jacqueline Lee Jackie Bouvier at a dinner party. They were married on the 12th of September 1953. After suffering a miscarriage in 1955 and a stillbirth in 1956, their daughter Arabella, their daughter Caroline was born in 1957. John Jr., nicknamed John, was born in November 1960, 17 days after his father was elected. A graduate of Brown University, John Jr. died in 1999 when the small plane he was piloting crashed off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. In 1963, months before his assassination, Jackie gave birth to a son, Patrick. However, he died 2 days later due to complications from birth. John is reported to have had many affairs, including actresses Jean Tierney and Marilyn Monroe. The full extent of his relationship with Monroe, who in 1962 famously sang "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" at his birthday celebration, is not known, though it has been reported that they spent a weekend together in March 1962 while he was staying at Bing Crosby's house. Since researching JFK, a recent documentary shown on TV alludes that a second shooter may have been involved in his assassination, shooting John as his car passed the grassy knoll from behind a picket fence. The strange thing was that when I visited Grassy Knoll on the 1st of August 2013, I stood right by the picket fence to shade from the sun that day. Let's see where his grave is located. Please stop the video now if you don't want to see images of the president's body or his assassination. So there you have it, the grave of John F. Kennedy, 35th US President. As usual, if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Leave your comments below, I always reply to the comments. Thanks for watching, see you on the next one.